family and her friends, a rare survival from the medieval world. What could be more reliable or more revealing? Yet all is not as simple as it seems. It's not just that the official transcripts of their words were written in clerical Latin rather than the French they actually spoke, a notorial translation alerting us to the fact that this first-hand testimony is not quite as immediate as it might initially appear. It's also that, as befits such a star, Joan exerts a vast gravitational pull. By the time those who knew her spoke as witnesses in the nullification trial of 1456 about her childhood and her mission, they knew exactly who she had become and what she had accomplished. In recalling events and conversations from a quarter of a century earlier, they were grappling with the vagaries of long-treasured memories and telling stories that were deeply infused with hindsight, which by that stage included knowledge not only of her life and death, but also of the final defeat of the English in France between 1449 and 1453, events that served to vindicate Joan's assertion of God's purpose beyond anything achieved in her lifetime or for years thereafter. In many ways, then, the story of Joan of Arc, as told in a nullification trial, is a life told backwards. The same could also be said of Joan's account of herself at the trial of condemnation of 1431. The unshakable conviction in her cause and the extraordinary self-possession that had brought her to the Dauphin's presence at Chinon in February 1429 only grew as time went on. We call her Joan of Arc, for example, taking her father's appellation, Dark, and transferring it to her, but that was a name she never used. Just a few weeks after her arrival at court, she was already referring to herself as Jeanne la Pucelle, Joan the Maid, a title redolent with meaning, suggesting not only her youth and purity, but her status as God's chosen servant, and her closeness to the Virgin, to whom she claimed a special devotion. And the sense of herself that she expressed at her trial was no neutral account of her experiences, but a defense of her beliefs and actions in response to prolonged questioning from hostile prosecutors intent on exposing her as a liar and a heretic. As such, it's a rich, absorbing, and multi-layered text, but one that is as difficult to interpret as it is invaluable. Unsurprisingly, the effect of Joan's gravitational field, the self-defining narrative pull of her mission, is equally apparent in historical accounts of her life. Most begin not with the story of the long and bitter war that had ravaged France since before she was born, but with Joan herself hearing voices in her village of Domremy in the far east of the kingdom. That means that we come to the Dauphin's court at Chinon with Joan rather than experiencing the shock of her arrival, and as a result, it's not easy to understand the full complexity of the political context into which she walked, or the nature of the responses she received. And because all our information about Joan's life in Domremy comes from her own statements and those of her friends and family in the two trials, historical narratives which start there are infused from the very beginning with the same hindsight that permeates their testimony. Distortion, then, is one risk, but beyond that, what lies at the center of this gravitational field is immensely difficult to read. On closer investigation it can seem, unnervingly, as though Joan's star might collapse into a black hole. When we go back to the trial transcripts, at almost every point in her story there are discrepancies between the accounts of different witnesses, and sometimes within the testimony of a single witness, including that of Joan herself, about the detail of events, their timing, and their interpretation. The accounts we have, in other words, don't straightforwardly build into a coherent and internally compatible whole. That's hardly surprising. After all, eyewitness testimony can differ even about recent events, and in relatively unpressured circumstances. Joan, we must remember, was interrogated over many days by prosecutors she knew were seeking to prove her guilt, and the nullification trial sought to clear her name by asking those who knew her to recall what she had said and done more than 25 years after the fact. Even if they aren't surprising, however, these inconsistencies and contradictions raise the question of how the evidence should best be understood. Sometimes historians have picked their way through the different accounts, choosing some details to weave into a seamless story and glossing over other elements that don't fit.